This panel is focused on digital inclusion and innovation and featured skills. And I just want to say, because I just want to take a space to acknowledge the fact that I have 3 incredible women with me today. And I want to say that this is not intentional. I actually looked. I was like, for once I had a conversation, I need to find a male speaker. I only have women on my panel for digital inclusion and future skills. And I will say that I'm very proud that this has happened, because it's one of those things that right now we always see like women in tech as a topic and girls in STEM, but to just be powerful women who happen to be doing great things and powerful things within the digital space, I think is really a powerful message. And I'd like to see this change happen more often. So with that being said, I'm going to start off our panel. And to start off, if you want to each share a little bit of background on yourself and kind of the context in which you're involved in the space, and then we can dig into the conversation.
Okay, I guess because I'm the first one sitting here. So welcome everybody, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me here today, Kelly. My name is Aminka Belvitt, and a little bit about myself. I am a social and tech entrepreneur, and what's really interesting is that I didn't start out my life being in the tech space. I am Jamaican born, moved to Canada here when I was 5. I always say that because that's a part of my story. And my vision for when I was young was to work in politics. I worked on Parliament Hill, I was working on policies, I attended parliamentary briefings, and then I believe like the mid 2010, I wanted something different. I wanted to change. And then a couple of years later, in 2015, I ended up in the tech industry. I was working for a startup company, and they do language learning. So they have a web-based platform and a mobile app. So I was thinking to myself, how does like a black woman, visibly can see that I'm black, and we're not always recognized in this space and for our work that we do, doing in this tech industry. And so I ended up being the business and a marketing manager of this app, and I had to learn on the go. But I believe that, and others can share as well too, you learn a lot of things in school. But what I love about the tech industry, it's about solving problems, number 1. Number 2, it's about critical thinking. And number 3 is about doing the first 2 in a quicker, in a more efficient way and less cost effective, if you're very good at being what you're doing. And so I learned that very quickly, so that I ended up working with developers, learned how to code myself by working with software developers and just asking them to teach me. But what I found in this industry, that I was visibly a woman of color, and I was having difficult time having my team, the developers, front end, back end, mobile developers, take orders from me, even though I was writing their paychecks. And it was very difficult. And then from there, I realized there's something more. It's not just about we don't understand how to code, there's a cultural change. So from there, I decided to look into further the different issues. So I created my own startup called the Wofemtech Solutions, and I'll get into that later. And then I created also to a tech summit in partnership with my partner, SAP NextGen, who supports me being here today. So I'm really in this space as somebody who's here to create solutions, number 1, and make it more accessible, not only for people of color and people from different identities, but from those who had a different entry point into this industry, but belong here because we know how to disrupt. And we wanted to sit at the table.
I also want to thank Kelly for this fantastic, and your terrific team for the fantastic day today. Really been enjoying it. My name is Ursula Wynhoven. I work for the International Telecommunication Union. We're the oldest United Nations entity from 1865, been around since the T stood for telegraph. These days, it's actually all about, of course, different kinds of technology, emerging technologies, and a lot about bridging digital divides. So specifically what we do in technology, we allocate radio frequency spectrum that make all our wonderful devices actually work. Satellite orbits, which are also critical to that, technology standards, which are also critical to being able to use the technology. And the piece that I work on more, because I represent them at the United Nations in New York, is bridging digital divides. And our overall mission of the entity is to connect everybody, everywhere, no matter where they live, no matter what their means. And it was already mentioned earlier today that it's so hard to believe us all sitting here with multiple devices connected, but at the end of last year, we only just hit 51% of the world connected. So we've still got a long way to go. And as also was mentioned, there's a huge inequalities growing, so it's really urgent to close these gaps sooner rather than later. So that's what our interest is in this theme of this panel, and really delighted to be participating with these incredible other women. And Kelly, a huge fan. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I also want to acknowledge the incredible work that Kelly and her team have done, and I think we all need to say thank you. So let's give them a round of applause. If I started to tell my story, we'd be here a long time, and I don't think we've got that amount of time. I'll simply say I'm the CEO of an award-winning AI software SaaS company in Canada. We recently ran their MindBridge Award this year, and last year we won in National and Regional Startup Canada Awards. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Kelly and her dream, and so I'm really here to share and have the dialogue. I wear the hat for Canada for STEM, for Science, Technology, Engineering, Math, from as representative. I'm on the board director of CATA, and I'm very deep into this area, and I think I can handle most of the questions. I will say that one thing I've learned in the AI space, I used to program many years ago, but I started in the arts, and I think that's an important part of the story, because I think it's really critical we understand that STEM is simply ubiquitous as a utility in a highway, and all aspects of every profession will come to bear. And I think we need to recognize that. This is not just computing science and math. This is all of us working together, and I can absolutely tell you the ins and outs on that, and all the new things and new job careers are going to all come our way. So thanks for inviting me, and I look forward to the dialogue and your tough questions, Kelly. So take it over, girl.
Well, we'll start it off with there then, and thank you all. So with that being said, we started off the morning actually talking about future work in education, and our Minister of Ontario for Education brought up the importance of STEM, and I brought up the question, what about STEAM, for the creative aspects, and the fact that you bring up the creative background from where you started. I also believe when you're looking at a lot of these advanced technologies, complex the problem solving comes from a creative mindset, being able to connect multiple dots and concepts and bring them together. So to elaborate on that, what do you feel is that toolkit that talent needs? When we're talking about digital inclusion, what is that toolkit that we need to thrive in the future?
Well, I think there's three key things, and I'm always a big believer in three, because usually we can't remember much more, especially when we know that later there's a reception. First point is life's just a series of challenges and problems, so most important point, number one, is critical thinking skills. Because critical thinking means we look at things from all perspectives and all edges, and that's the most important point. Doesn't matter what discipline you're in, and it certainly is very, very important in the AI field. So that's point number one. The second that I think is the most significant is empathy, because the new world we're entering is going to have so much bias and so many legal complexities. We've not seen anything from the perspective of inaccurate data sets that don't represent the diversity inclusiveness to drive a conclusion. To the designers that are building the code, if they don't have empathy, they won't take in all the personas and personalities that are needed. So that's why empathy is becoming a really acute cognitive skill development to build. The third, I think, quite frankly, is and I think a lot of you are here today because you have a passion for lifelong learning. Life's a series of journeys. It's not a marathon, it's simply a journey. And the more we understand that and build, kind of the appreciation of ebbs and flows in lives, and obviously we can talk about complexity science theory and get into physics there, because life is really about energy. But I think those are three key things. I think the people that believe, and I'm going to challenge the Minister of Education on one point, and it wasn't maybe appropriate when he was here, but I didn't have the time, but the most important point is recognize that the new enablement that's coming, i.e., I type in an email, it'll be rewritten to the tonality best to suit that audience automatically through AI derivatives. I can't do math, but do I need to do math? Because if I can think of the vision, the pieces of the puzzle will come together. So I think we have to actually start to challenge some of the new enablements coming our way, especially as robots are entering the workforce.
With that in mind, when we're looking at AI and some of the robotics and automations that are coming in, what Ursula, what challenge or opportunity do you see in some of these more emerging trends from your perspective of ITU?
Definitely, I would start with talking about the opportunities. And actually, we're just having a side chat outside. And thanks again to you for this great conference. We've made some great connections already. One of the things we do is convene this conference every year called AI for Good Summit. And it brings people together from business, government, 37 UN agencies, all looking at different kinds of applications of AI and emerging technologies for, among other things, the Sustainable Development Goals. So there's such enormous potential. And I think sometimes there's such a mixed narrative out there. Like, there's a lot of fear. People worry about disruption and automation and jobs, and those are important themes to look at and to ensure that there's, among other things, as has come up today, lifelong learning, so that the rapid disruption and change that's happening, doesn't fall disproportionately on certain, groups. But there's also, there are some other challenges as well. I think, among other things, there are concerns about bias that's in data and how AI can replicate that at a much greater speed with much greater consequences.
I want to touch on that a little bit because I think that's a key element, because we do always talk about it from the perspective of job displacements and things, but ethics is actually becoming a huge new field when we're looking at the AI. It's emerging and coming into conversations, because essentially when you're teaching the AI, it's going to take the bias of the individuals who are creating it. So if you don't have a diverse team that's creating it, you're missing things. And we see that even now with technology and automated technologies, things where it's like even unintentional, where perhaps it was built by individuals who were not in a wheelchair, so they forgot to make it accessible for someone who's in a wheelchair, or we have automatic hand dispensers and they didn't do it for the color of the skin, that it wasn't theirs. And like, there's things that sometimes are what you would call unintentional oversights or biases built in, versus then someone who's very opinionated or has a certain perspective of political perspective, gender perspective, identity perspective, and the AI is going to learn that. So how can we broach this topic? How do we start to put safeguards in place to ensure that inclusive and using AI, to your point, for good and bringing us together rather than widening those gaps?
One of the things I would say is critical, and we were also chatting about this outside, is just who's actually working on this. And at the moment, it's not a very diverse and inclusive group. There's such a need to have many more people with more diverse backgrounds involved, a lot more women involved. According to one study, only 14% of those working in AI are women. According to another study, perhaps in a more limited data, was about higher, but still only like 20-something%. So that is like an absolutely vital priority. And I also think that there's a lot of opportunity for women and minorities in this space of AI and emerging technologies. Since they are so new, there's an opportunity to kind of get in at the ground level. And example here, AI CEO, AI ambassador for Canada, look at fantastic role models. So I think it is a huge opportunity. And if we don't get that right, I think we'll see many more challenges with these emerging technologies, including lack of diversity and lack of inclusion.
And then, Aminka, taking more of the perspective of the next generation, bringing into tech, because your story, like you said, you kind of started not necessarily in tech itself, but found it as a way, and you started off right away saying basically tech is efficiency, and then that was kind of reiterated with your fellow panelists. So how do you see us bridging gaps where kind of seeing tech as a tool that everyone has in their toolkit? How do we bridge some of those gaps?
Yeah, no, that's definitely perfect. And I think it goes back to even the previous question, right? Like, how do we work on data input to ensure that our human biases are removed? And that's simply allowing people of color, people who have biases, who it's marginalized against. And like right now, if you're Googling for a certain look, and the AI they take whatever's there. And so what it does, it scans for Google. So if you're looking for yourself, you say, oh, I want to look for a black male or something. You're going to end up getting data sets that perhaps is negative. It's only been on the internet that has something to do with perhaps crime, right? So what that does and why that's connected with the youth is that you give the empowerment to them and to say that this is a tool. So one thing that we did at New Reality, and why I call it a New Reality, it's a tech summit specifically for girls, and we work with girls of color, is now is where you can create a new reality. You have all the tools that you need in your life, whether you did a degree or not. You can get it on Coursera or LinkedIn for Learning. And what it is what we do is not just to say, oh, this is different things about tech, meet all these speakers. We break them up and we use design thinking, and each of them gets a global goal. We use it with a global goal, and we say to them, we give them a question. What can you create, for an instance, that will reduce climate change in your community? And you have to use technology as a component. So one, you have to empower the youth to use it as a tool to say whatever art you're looking for, if it's fashion, hair, or whatever, find a way that technology is a part of it. And I think that if you're empowering the youth right now with the tools, the information, and giving them to think with design thinking and think to creatively and have and empathy, they're going to be the ones in the room. And also, too, for those who don't work with youth, it's very important if you're working for a tech company that you have people of color, because they're the ones that are being marginalized by this technology. So it's really great to say, let's have women, but me being a black woman is not the same experience of somebody who is not black, right? And so it's very important that at the same time that we're empowering youth, but we're empowering the youth that aren't being in these rooms, that the technology is marginalized against. For instance, we do a lot of work with New York, and I would tour the schools in New Jersey, tour the schools in Harlem and Brooklyn, and you see the difference. And shockingly, because we think we're Canadian, computer science is not in every classroom, right? So it's like we want to think about equality and youth empowerment. Where are these AI programs? Where are these advanced programs? The coding camps, who's in your coding camp? Who has accessibility to coding camps? So if we want to create a society where technology is included and you have the brightest minds creating these solutions, you got to make sure people of color and low income are at those camps, at the school, and has the responsibility to take ownership, because when they do have the opportunity, they create the most magical and transformative solutions.
And building on that too, I want to just kind of preface as well that I've noticed that you don't necessarily have to want to pursue a career in tech to benefit from knowing tech skills and having digital literacy. I wrote an article a couple of years ago talking about like the new cursive writing is coding, in the sense that here in Canada, we learn cursive writing in grade 3. You may learn it earlier or different, depending on where you are in the country. But it was kind of just the standard thing that just like you would learn a second language or whatever it is in your course, it's just once you hit that grade, it's part of the course. You learn it as a skill. Whether you choose to write in cursive down the road is your own prerogative that way. But it was everyone learned it. And if you take the same perspective with digital literacy and coding, and everyone learned it, I do think that we could potentially bridge some of these gaps because everyone's exposed to it. And then we need to focus on obviously keeping some on those tracks. But what do you feel about how these skills, and particularly AI is really interesting when we're looking at education and how that's going to affect what we can do in the classroom. You can do some really cool things. We talk about all the doomsday, but we can do some really creative things. So my question is, based on that, what would be an example that you've seen of some really creative applications of some of these disruptive technologies?
Well, that's a really powerful question. There's so many aspects. I'm just going to talk about what we do because it's just, I'm so into it. I think the first point I really want to ensure everybody understands in AI is it just, it's a definition that's not actually universally defined. That's point number one. Point number two, in other words, if you go to all the academics, they'll have different points of view. If you ask a group of CEOs how to define it, but at the simplest level, it's about mimicking human intelligence. The second most important point is it's only as good as the data you feed it. So we've talked about the skills around AI in terms of team. Recognize it's the data and understanding the problem you're trying to solve, and do you have a representative data set to solve that problem? So back to critical thinking. You have to get clear. Don't worry about the technology. The problem you're solving may not even require an AI enablement solution. So I just really want to make sure that's crisp and clear. In terms of where this industry is going, there's so many foundations of platforms that you can ingest a representative data set and it'll just spit out the algorithm, right? You don't need to know to code unless you're going to extend a fair bit and you need to work in Python, but a lot of these technologies are going to disappear. So I just want everybody to understand that I look at AI as simply like gas in the car. It's just going to be ubiquitous like oxygen. It's just going to be in everything. And the reality is a lot of these interfaces, where I think we need to empower the youth and take the youth and the next generation, is really for you to identify the gaps and, you know, to make sure you've got representative, diverse perspectives in solutioning. And it's a solutioning skill where the magic happens. And don't, you know, because sometimes we get caught up in the buzzwords of technology. Now, in terms of what we do, it's a very big problem because cognitively, as a human race, our attention spans dropped by 50% since the advent of mobile and innovative technology. So we're actually becoming dumber as a human race. Our attention span has dropped to about 8 seconds before you have an interrupting thought. It's actually less than a goldfish. So we need to understand the integration factor of humans and robots, and that is really coming. I just came back from an Asian trip, and longer stories other days. But the reality is that what we solve is predicting outcomes on sales forecasts more reliably than humans can, because we've always overestimated. If you know salespeople, they overestimate most things in life in terms of confidence. So we really bring in a risk perspective on a real issue. It's a real applied innovation. It works. And the exciting part of this tech, which I find it's interesting, the circle of life is all about language and discourse. And in the natural language processing, NLP area, which is based on linguistics and psychological profiling and tonality, you can predict futures just simply by the mood, just like your nonverbal language. So we have got so much content out there that can really drive that personification. And so I'm very excited about, you know, I'm envisioning now, I know how to solve the problem. I'll be able to press a button soon, and I'll know all the talent and my sales force, whether I'm matched up with the right buyer and seller psychologically, especially in large accounts. And that's very exciting because you'd rather be talking to, like, I'm a high driver persona and a high expressive. And so tonality and innovation and passion are really important. You put me in a room with someone who's got no imagination and talks in monosyllables, I'm probably terribly bored. So the reality is 98% of people buy from people they connect with. And so that phenomena in AI is very exciting in terms of where I sit. Because you know what? Life's short. I want to make every moment count. And so if I can get connected to the right person, it sounds like a dating app, but just think of harmony everywhere, maybe, is the way to look at it.
In terms of school, right?
It's coming. It's exciting.
Yeah, and in terms of school, what you were saying just quickly about how you can use it in the classroom. So for instance, like if you're in a language class for French, and we had this company we're with, instead of having the teacher having to have the oral test all the time, use the app, right? And so the app allows you, at least one we were using, to have individual tutors where they can test their oral testing with them, and they can have it from different perspectives, like different native language. So if you have you come from a different ethnic background, you learn in French, it's a different approach. So having an app or a platform to allow them to use that, it makes it easier. And also too, with my company, I have a nonprofit, and it's called the Forest Girls Foundation, and we run a coding program. And one of the girls, we taught them CCS and HTML to build their own project, and the mother told me the following term, she was in the program in the spring, and then in the fall, she told me her final class project, instead of doing a report, she just built a website. So it's like, you know, for a teacher, you can find ways in the classroom that, one, now you're reducing paper, you're being more sustainable, and you're employing your students to have more skills that they're going to need in the future.
Well, it's interesting when you bring up education, and you both kind of touched on it briefly. It was brought up in a panel I was just on with the United Nations Civil Society Conference, and we talked about sci-fi thinking, science fiction thinking. And essentially what it does is it applies technology thinking with a creative imagination, because you brought up imagination, and I think they're a little bit like, I don't want to say an oxymoron, but a little bit in the sense that they're very divergent thoughts. You think kind of tech is very analytical and very straightforward, and then you add imagination to that, and that's the recipe or the nexus in where you find a lot of the change maker solutions, how we solve problems, how we innovate for the future, is when you mix the two worlds together. And to your point, I think a theme throughout the entire panelists here has been that AI and disruptive technology is really a tool in like you said, gas. It's a fuel to help us become more efficient, But I think that does, and I'll leave the audience with this question and this thought, as we become more efficient, what are we going to do with that time? And I think that time is where we have the ability to be more creative, to use our imagination and see how we can connect the dots between problems and solutions with the technology to solve a lot of these challenges, like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So I definitely, it doesn't give us more time to, we're always naturally, we just become more productive so we can do more with our abilities and our time, and more can be solving challenges.
Just want to do a quick build on what you just said, and I think it's a bit of a sobering thought in the sense that what was raised here today was about 50% of the world doesn't have access to the internet, right? So your point on time is where the digital divide is actually going to explode in growth unless we all come together and give access, which is, you've got a very big role to play. You can help control spectrum, but we need to get the enablement into everybody's hands. And that is a big issue, right? Because this explosion of the speed that's happening between China right now and the US is unprecedented. And with, you know, if you even look at sense time, most people aren't aware of that guerrilla play. It's the most significant unicorn in the history of the world in China that has cameras integrated into every major orifice you could possibly imagine, and digitizing every pixel of what you wear, connected with every other database. And Silicon Valley Bank in the US has a pretty big investment in them. But that kind of, if you want to call it insight, and changing billboards and knowing everything in real time it's a little bit George Orwellian in some respects, but the impact that that will have in ability to advance innovation is nothing we've seen in our lifetime. So I almost look like, imagine what we're like in the Wild West, right? We were sitting in the buggies and hearing about the possibility of a train or even a plane, and we've not seen anything of what's going to happen. I think that's one of the reasons there's so many people worried in the, you know, the integration of man and machine and the interfaces. But unless we give everybody equal access, you know, that's the worry, Kelly, for me, honestly. It really, really is.
And I think that's where we need to focus and start then, is looking at the perspective of access. How do we have everyone have the same toolkit so we can solve the challenges and use our skills to the best of the abilities? I think that's a great way of ending it. So to summarize, kind of focusing on access, looking at, I also just want to acknowledge they all came from different backgrounds, so not seeing that your path to using tech needs to be straightforward, is I want to be a developer and be an engineer, that you could enter into STEM and tech in a different way, and then using that extra time and efficiency and productivity to bring more light to the world, essentially, and see what we can do creatively. Because that is one thing we will always have right now on top of robots and all those things, is the ability to think creatively and connect multiple points and different, very arbitrary different concepts. AI is obviously going to do some of that, but the creative imagination component, I think, is very unique right now for us humans.
Can I make a really brief point? Because I think another thing which picks up a theme from today is really about the importance of cooperation. Because whether we're looking at the challenges or looking towards the opportunities, we really need to have a lot more cooperation. There's a lot of awesome things going on out there, but really by joining up the dots, we can have much greater impact together and also be more successful at addressing some of the challenges.
And just finally, I think I just want to say as well, too, like as you were just saying about we can be able to be creative and technology will allow us to be more connected. But I think as well, too, is that if we're going to allow technology to be more accessible to the world, we have to allow people to use it in a way that we might not necessarily be comfortable with, right? Like you can't give somebody access to technology and tell them, okay, well, you're going to work for my company and you're going to create this solution. That can't really work. If you're looking in places in like Latin America or in Africa, the most emerging solutions are coming from those who are creating it. For instance, the company Acorn, they're using solar energy and clean energy to be able to bring light to different places in Africa that wasn't there. So for me, it's like, it's great to make it accessible and access, but we have to be sure that we're not in the West or certain powers holding individuals the type of power and to say how you can use technology. We have to allow people to leverage it for their own selves to create their own solution, because I believe that would really decrease inequality. Because technology, for me, I always say it's the equalizer for somebody. Like, look what happened to India and look what happened to other parts of Southeast Asia and Bangladesh. They use technology and the education to elevate themselves out of poverty. The way that we can mention China is because they use that. So we can't think no different of other states that are in the global south of the world. We have to allow them to emerge the technology for themselves to bring the equalizer of that we experience inequality in the world.
Access and efficiency toolkit. Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you, Kelly.